My parents sent me away for a few weeks. I wasn't allowed to come back for 12. My name is Elise, and I am 34 years old. I grew up in what seemed like a normal suburban Minnesota home with my parents and older brother. When I was 13, my parents told me they were sending me away to a special camp for a few weeks. Those few weeks turned into 12 long years. I never imagined that a simple goodbye would lead to over a decade of separation, or that I would uncover such painful truths about why they made that decision. Before I take you through this journey that changed my life forever, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end to see how I finally reclaimed my life. Growing up in Maple Grove, Minnesota, our house was the envy of the neighborhood. A sprawling 2-story colonial with perfectly manicured lawns and a wraparound porch where my mother would serve lemonade during summer gatherings. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family that everyone aspired to be. My father, James, was a respected cardiovascular surgeon at the largest hospital in Minneapolis. He commanded respect wherever he went with his perfectly pressed suits and authoritative presence. People would often tell me how lucky I was to have such a successful father, but they never saw him at home. Behind closed doors, he was demanding and critical, expecting nothing less than perfection from his children. My mother, Diana, complimented him perfectly, a former beauty queen turned socialite who chaired every important committee in town. She was obsessed with appearances and maintaining our family's sterling reputation in the community. Her smile never reached her eyes when she talked about her wonderful family at social gatherings. Then there was my brother Kyle, 4 years older than me. He learned early on how to navigate our parents' expectations, becoming the golden child. Straight A's captain of the debate team early acceptance to Princeton. He became what they wanted, but I often caught glimpses of unhappiness behind his achievements. And then there was me. I tried so hard to be what they wanted. I really did. But somehow, I was always falling short. If I got a 98% on a test, the conversation at dinner would be focused entirely on the 2% I missed. When I won second place in the school science fair, my father simply asked, "Why not first?" Looking back, I can see the dysfunction that surrounded us. But as a child, I thought this was normal. I thought all families lived with this suffocating pressure. I thought love was conditional based on achievement and compliance. The first signs that I might not fit their mold appeared around age 11. While my parents pushed me towards science and mathematics, planning my medical career before I could even drive, I found myself drawn to art and music. I would spend hours sketching in my room, creating worlds where I could breathe freely, where mistakes were just part of the creative process. My mother found my sketchbooks once and flipped through them with a look of disappointment. "These are nice hobbies, Elise, but they won't get you into medical school." She tossed them aside like they were nothing, like my passion was nothing. As I entered my early teens, normal adolescent behaviors became major points of contention. I remember the first time I stayed out 15 minutes past my curfew because my friend Zoe and I lost track of time at the mall. You would have thought I had committed a serious crime. "How do you expect us to trust you when you make such irresponsible decisions?" my father shouted while my mother stood by with arms crossed, nodding in agreement. That was the first night I was grounded for a month. For 15 minutes. Zoe became my lifeline during this time. Her family was so different from mine. Her parents asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. They hung her artwork on the refrigerator and attended her soccer games with their son without criticizing her performance afterward. Being at her house was like visiting a foreign country where the language was warmth and acceptance. "Why are your parents so strict?" she asked me once as we walked home from school. I shrugged, not knowing how to explain something I barely understood myself. "They just want what's best for me, I guess." But as 7th grade progressed, the tension at home grew worse. My grades, while still excellent by normal standards, had slipped from perfect to merely outstanding. I had started listening to music my parents disapproved of, not because it was particularly rebellious, but because it spoke to the growing unrest in my soul. One afternoon, I came home to find my mother sitting on my bed holding a CD she had discovered, hidden in my desk drawer. "What is this garbage?" she asked, holding it between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. "It's just music, Mom." "This is not the kind of music young ladies with futures listen to," she said, breaking the disc in half before my eyes. That night, I cried myself to sleep, feeling the walls closing in around me. I was 13 years old and already felt like I was suffocating under the weight of expectations I could never meet. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume the next 12 years of my life. My parents' definition of acceptable behavior was narrowing, and I was increasingly falling outside those boundaries simply by trying to discover who I really was. The summer I turned 13 should have been filled with bike rides, swimming pool visits, and late-night giggles with friends. Instead, it became the summer that changed everything. The arguments with my parents had escalated from occasional disagreements to daily battles. Every aspect of my life became a source of conflict, from the clothes I wore to the friends I chose. "You're becoming someone we don't recognize," my father said during one particularly heated argument. I remember thinking how ironic that statement was, since I was only just beginning to recognize myself. Finding my own voice felt like the most natural thing in the world, but to them it was an act of betrayal. The final straw came on an ordinary Tuesday in July. I had saved up my allowance for weeks to buy a new album from a female rock artist who wrote songs about independence and finding your own path. Her lyrics spoke to me in ways my parents never could. I had hidden the CD in my pillowcase, taking it out only when I was alone with my headphones. But somehow, they found it. Along with journals where I had written about my frustrations with their controlling behavior, my dreams of becoming an artist, and worst of all, my questions about whether their religious and political beliefs were actually my own. That evening, my parents called me into the living room for an important family discussion. The formal setting should have been my first warning. They sat stiffly on the couch while I perched nervously on the edge of the armchair across from them. My brother Kyle was noticeably absent. "Elise," my father began, his voice calm in that terrifying way that signaled serious consequences were coming. "Your mother and I have made a decision. We think you need some specialized help that we can't provide at home." My stomach dropped, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. "We've enrolled you in a special academic summer program," my mother continued, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's for exceptional young people who need additional structure and guidance. Just for a few weeks to help you get back on the right track." Relief flooded through me. A summer camp. That didn't sound so bad. Maybe some time away from home was exactly what we all needed. "When does it start?" I asked already, thinking about what to pack. "Tomorrow," my father answered. "Tomorrow," I echoed in disbelief. "But what about saying goodbye to my friends? What about the art class I'm supposed to start next week?" "This is more important than art classes," my mother said dismissively. "And you can see your friends when you get back. It's only for a few weeks, Elise." Those words. Only a few weeks. They would echo in my mind for years to come. That night was a blur of hurried packing and confusion. My parents stood over me as I filled a single suitcase, rejecting half the items I tried to include. "No, not that," my mother said, removing a journal from my hands. "They provide all necessary materials." "But that's my personal journal," I protested. "You'll get a fresh start there," she insisted, adding the journal to a growing pile of rejected items. Even more strange was what they did allow me to bring. Only plain clothes, nothing with logos or graphics. No makeup, no accessories, no books except for my school Bible. It was like they were sending me to some kind of military academy. As I was finishing packing, Kyle appeared in my doorway, his face uncharacteristically serious. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, glancing nervously down the hall. When we were alone, he hugged me tightly. I tried to talk them out of this, Elise. I really did. A cold fear gripped me. "Talk them out of what?" "It's just a summer program, right?" He pulled back, his expression troubled. "Just keep your head down, okay? Do whatever they tell you to do there. It'll be easier that way." Before I could ask what he meant, my mother called him away. That was the last private conversation I had with my brother for years. The next morning, we loaded into our family SUV. The drive was long and silent. I watched as suburban landscapes gave way to countryside and then to increasingly remote terrain. After several hours, we turned onto an unmarked dirt road that wound through dense forest. When we finally emerged into a clearing, I saw a cluster of institutional buildings surrounded by high fences. It looked nothing like the summer camps I'd seen in movies or brochures. There was no lake, no cabins, no laughing counselors in matching t-shirts. Instead, stern-faced adults in polo shirts watched as we pulled up to the main building. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice small with growing fear. "It's the academy we told you about," my father said, avoiding my eyes as he unloaded my suitcase. Inside, we were greeted by a woman with a tight smile who introduced herself as Mrs. Blackwood, the intake coordinator. She led us to a sterile office where my parents filled out paperwork while I sat frozen with confusion. When it was time to say goodbye, my mother hugged me stiffly. "It's only for a few weeks," she repeated. "Until you learn to make better choices." My father patted my shoulder. Listen to the staff. Do what they tell you. We'll see you when the program is complete. And then they were gone, leaving me with strangers in a place that already felt like a prison. As the door closed behind them, Mrs. Blackwood's smile disappeared. All right, Elise, time for processing. That was the moment my old life ended and a 12-year nightmare began. The camp my parents had sent me to was called New Dawn Academy, though there was nothing academic about it. Located in rural Utah, it was one of many facilities across the country designed to reform troubled teens through strict discipline and behavior modification. I would later learn that such places existed in a legal grey area, largely unregulated and unmonitored. My first day set the tone for what was to come. After my parents left, I was taken to a small room where female staff members made me strip naked for a contraband check. They searched every part of my body while I stood there, humiliated tears streaming down my face. They took everything I had brought, telling me I would earn these privileges back through good behavior. I was given a uniform khaki pants and a plain blue polo shirt. When I asked when classes would start or where the art supplies were, the staff member laughed. This isn't that kind of program, she said. The facility housed about 60 teenagers, boys and girls, kept strictly separated. Our days began at 5:30 in the morning with military-style bed-making and room inspection. Meals were quick, bland affairs eaten in complete silence. Between meals were therapeutic sessions that felt more like indoctrination, physical labor disguised as character building, and endless periods of sitting perfectly still in reflection. The row rules were innumerable and often contradictory, making it impossible to avoid breaking them. Looking a staff member in the eye could be interpreted as defiance. Not making eye contact could be seen as disrespect. Speaking out of turn earned punishment. Failing to speak when spoken to earned punishment. Everything was designed to keep us off balance, never knowing what to expect. Punishments ranged from loss of already scarce privileges, to physical exercises, to isolation. The worst was reflection room, where students were sent to sit facing a wall for hours or even days, prohibited from speaking or moving. After 2 weeks, I was allowed my first phone call home. I had been counting the days, rehearsing what I would say, how I would beg my parents to come get me. When my mother's voice came on the line, I broke down in tears. "Mom, please, I want to come home. I've learnt my lesson. Please." There was a pause before she responded. "Elise, we've spoken with your counsellors. They say you're still showing defiant behaviour and refusing to engage with the program." "That's not true," I protested, aware of the staff member hovering nearby, monitoring every word. "The program directors know what they're doing," my father's voice cut in. They had me on speakerphone. "You need to complete the full course of treatment." "But you said it was just for a few weeks," I reminded them, panic rising in my throat. "A few weeks was the minimum," my mother explained in a detached voice I didn't recognize. "The actual length depends on your progress. It could be a few months." My world collapsed around me. They weren't coming to get me. This wasn't a short-term punishment. This was abandonment. As the weeks turned into months, I tried to make sense of my new reality. I met other students who had been there much longer than me. One of them was Mia, a 16-year-old from California, who had been at New Dawn for almost a year. "My parents sent me because they found out I was gay," she whispered to me during a rare moment of unsupervised interaction. "They think this place can fix me." Mia became my lifeline. We developed a system of subtle gestures and code words to communicate under the watchful eyes of staff. She showed me how to survive, which rules could be bent, and which were never worth breaking. "The trick is to play along," she advised. "Tell them what they want to hear. Write the letters they want you to write. Say the things they want you to say. It's the only way out." I tried to follow her advice, but something in me resisted the complete surrender they demanded. I wrote letters home, begging to return, pouring my heart out about how much I had changed, how I had seen the error of my ways. But these letters were read by staff before being sent, and most never made it out at all. The few that did receive responses came back with cold, formal replies that felt scripted. "Your counsellors tell us you're making progress, but still have a long way to go," my mother wrote. "We're praying for your full recovery." Recovery from what being myself, having my own thoughts. I couldn't understand what horrible crime I had committed to deserve this imprisonment. After 6 months at New Dawn, the crushing reality set in that I wasn't going home anytime soon. Mia and I began planning an escape. For weeks we saved small amounts of food, observed staff rotations, and studied the perimeter of the facility during outdoor time. On a cold winter night, We slipped out of our rooms during a shift change and made it as far as the outer fence before searchlights caught us. The consequences were severe. We were separated immediately. I spent 2 weeks in isolation, allowed out only for monitored bathroom breaks. When I emerged, Mia was gone. She's been transferred to another facility. A staff member informed me when I asked. The message was clear: form bonds at your peril. That was the moment I truly understood the magnitude of what my parents had done. They hadn't sent me to a camp or a school. They had sentenced me to a system designed to break me to remake me in an image they found acceptable, and they had the power to keep me there indefinitely. I was 13 years old, and I had just disappeared from the world. As my 14th birthday passed, unacknowledged within the walls of New Dawn, I received the news that I was being graduated to their long-term program. This wasn't the release I had desperately hoped for, but rather a transfer to what they called Horizon Academy, a therapeutic boarding school located deeper in the Utah wilderness. Your parents have recognized that you need more intensive intervention, Mrs. Blackwood explained as I was loaded into a transport van with blacked-out windows. This is for your own good, Elise. Horizon Academy was larger than New Dawn housing over 100 students in dormitory-style buildings behind tall fences topped with barbed wire. The pretense of being an academic environment was stronger here, with actual classrooms and teachers, though the education was heavily focused on religious instruction and behavioral compliance. This would be the first of 5 facilities I would cycle through over the next decade. Each transfer followed the same pattern: initial hopes that this place would be better, the crushing realization that it was simply a different flavor of control, and eventually adaptation to a new set of arbitrary rules. By 15, I had learned to survive by becoming nearly invisible. I spoke only when spoken to. I completed assignments without complaint. I participated in group therapy by repeating the phrases I knew they wanted to hear. On the surface, I was the model student making progress in their eyes, while keeping my true self buried deep inside. The education I received was spotty at best. History was taught through a narrow ideological lens. Science was limited to basic concepts that didn't challenge certain worldviews. Literature was heavily censored. I was falling further behind my peers in the real world with every passing month, but academic achievement wasn't the goal of these places. Compliance was. My contact with my parents became increasingly infrequent and formal. Monitored phone calls every few months, occasional sterile visits where they would sit across from me in the facility's visiting room, asking surface-level questions about my progress, while avoiding any mention of when I might come home. During one such visit, when I was 16, my mother looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your room at home is being used as your father's home office now," she said casually. "When you complete the program, we'll rearrange things." The message was clear: there was no place for me at home anymore. I was being erased. But even in this bleak environment, small acts of humanity offered lifelines. Ms. Harriet, an elderly art teacher at one of the facilities, would slip me extra paper and pencils whispering, "Express yourself, just be careful where you hide it." Under my mattress, I accumulated a small collection of sketches, visual diaries of my thoughts and feelings that I couldn't safely express out loud. My brother Kyle managed one secret visit when I was 17. He had tracked me down through information he found in our parents' home office and posed as a cousin to gain entry. We had 15 heavily monitored minutes together. "Everyone thinks you're at some elite boarding school in Switzerland," he whispered when the staff briefly looked away. "Mom and Dad talk about how you're finding yourself through intensive education. Nobody knows the truth." "Help me get out," I pleaded. Pain crossed his face. "I'm trying, Elise, but you're a minor. Legally, they have the right to keep you here. Just hold on until you're 18. I'll help you then." But 18 came and went, and I remained institutionalized. By that point, I had been diagnosed with various mental health conditions by facility doctors, none of whom provided proper treatment, but whose diagnoses justified my continued confinement. I had also been convinced that I couldn't survive in the outside world, that I needed the structure and support these places provided. "You're not ready yet," the program director told me on my 18th birthday, "but you can voluntarily continue treatment as an adult. Your parents are willing to support this. It's the responsible choice, Elise." Beaten down by years of institutional living and terrified of a world I barely remembered, I signed the papers. I transitioned into an adult program at a therapeutic community where the control was more subtle but equally pervasive. My world remained confined to approved activities, monitored communications, and constant evaluation. Throughout these years, I formed bonds with other long-term residents, creating a makeshift family among the discarded children. There was Teresa sent away for dating someone her parents disapproved of, Jackson, whose crime was being caught with marijuana once, Aiden, who was gay in a family that couldn't accept him. We protected each other as best we could, sharing small comforts and keeping each other's hopes alive. When we get out, we would whisper to each other, we'll have our real lives. We'll make our own choices. We'll be free. For many of us, these whispered promises were all we had to hold on to as the years slipped away. On my 21st birthday, something shifted inside me. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of this milestone in the facility where I was living. But as I lay on my narrow bed that night, a clarity I hadn't felt in years washed over me. I was an adult. I had been for 3 years. And I was still living in a cage built by my parents' rejection and my own fear. For 8 years, I had been shuffled through a system designed to convince me that I was broken, that my thoughts and feelings were wrong, that I needed to be fixed. And I had started to believe it. But in that moment of clarity, I recognized the truth. The only thing truly wrong was that I had been abandoned by the people who should have loved me unconditionally. The next morning, I sought out Jackson Thompson, a newer staff member who had shown me small kindnesses since arriving 6 months earlier. Unlike the other employees who treated us with clinical detachment or outright contempt, Jackson spoke to us like human beings. He had slipped me books that weren't on the approved reading list and had conversations with me that weren't centered on my treatment plan. I found him in the small staff office during his break. I need to leave, I said without preamble. Not next month or when someone decides I'm ready. Now. He looked up at me, studying my face carefully before nodding slowly. I've been wondering when you'd realize you don't actually have to be here. Over the next 2 weeks, Jackson helped me prepare for departure. He couldn't do anything obvious without risking his job, but he provided crucial information about my rights as an adult and the logistics of leaving. He helped me secure copies of my identification documents, which had been kept safe by the facility administration. He explained how to access public transportation and gave me recommendations for low-cost housing options. Most importantly, he connected me with a former staff member who now worked with an advocacy group for survivors of institutional abuse. They couldn't offer much financial help, but they could provide guidance and emotional support for the transition. On a cool spring morning, I packed the few belongings I could truly call mine into a small backpack. I had saved nearly $400 from the nominal allowance I received for work performed at the facility. It wasn't much to start a new life with, but it was all I had. I walked to the administration office and informed them I was leaving. There were attempts to dissuade me, warnings about how I wasn't prepared for the outside world, and thinly veiled threats about contacting my parents. But legally, they couldn't stop me. I was an adult, voluntarily enrolled in their program, and I was withdrawing my consent to treatment. The moment I stepped beyond the facility gates was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in nearly a decade, no one was watching me, telling me what to do, or evaluating my behavior. The freedom was almost paralyzing. I followed the plan Jackson and I had worked out. I walked 3 miles to the nearest bus stop and caught a ride into Salt Lake City. There I found a cheap motel where I could stay for a few days while figuring out my next steps. That first night of freedom, I sat on the edge of the bed in my motel room, overwhelmed by choices I hadn't been allowed to make for years. What time should I go to sleep? What should I eat? What should I do tomorrow? The simplest decisions felt monumental. The next morning, I ventured out to find food and was immediately overwhelmed by the sensory overload of the city. Traffic sounds, conversations, music from passing cars. The sheer number of people moving around me, none of it regulated or controlled. In a small diner, I had my first panic attack, hyperventilating at the number of menu options and the need to interact normally with the waitress. "First time on your own?" she asked kindly, bringing me a glass of water as I tried to steady my breathing. Something in her expression told me she might understand, so I nodded. "Institutional?" she asked quietly. Surprised, I looked up. "How did you know?" She introduced herself as Amanda and explained that her younger sister had been through something similar. "Take your time," she said. "The pancakes are good and I'm not in a hurry." Amanda became my first friend in the outside world. When her shift ended, she sat with me for hours listening to fragments of my story without judgment. She offered me a temporary place to stay in her small apartment and helped me find a job washing dishes at the same diner. The adjustment was overwhelming, Grocery stores sent me into a tailspin with their endless choices. Public transportation was a puzzle I had to solve through trial and error. Social interactions were landmines of unfamiliar references and expectations. But slowly, with Amanda's patient guidance, I began to build the skills I needed to function independently. After a month of dishwashing, I had saved enough for a bus ticket to Minneapolis and first month's rent on a tiny room in a shared house. It was time to find out what had happened to my past, to the life and people I had been separated from for so long. Before leaving Salt Lake City, I did something I had dreamed about for years. I searched for Zoe, my childhood best friend, on social media. It took some digging, as I only had access to computers at the public library, but eventually I found her profile. With trembling hands, I sent her a message. "It's Elise. I don't know if you remember me, but we were friends a long time ago. I've been away, but I'm coming back to Minnesota. I'd really like to see you." Her response came just hours later. "OMG, Elise, where have you been all these years? Everyone said you were at some fancy school abroad, but then no one ever heard from you again. Yes, please, let's meet when you're back." With that connection re-established, I boarded a bus headed east toward the past I needed to confront and the future I was determined to create. The bus ride to Minneapolis took nearly 24 hours, giving me plenty of time to prepare mentally for what lay ahead. Each mile brought me closer to a confrontation I both dreaded and needed. As the familiar Minnesota landscape appeared outside my window, a complex mixture of emotions washed over me. This had once been home, but did I belong here anymore? I met Zoe at a coffee shop near the university where she was finishing her degree in education. The moment she spotted me, she rushed over and embraced me, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe it's really you," she kept saying. "We all wondered what happened. Your parents told everyone you'd been accepted to this prestigious international academy, but then there were never any visits home, no social media, nothing." I took a deep breath and told her the truth, watching her expression shift from confusion to horror as I explained where I'd really been all these years. "That can't be legal," she whispered when I finished. "It exists in a legal grey area," I explained, repeating what I'd learned from the advocacy group. Parents have broad rights to make decisions about their minor children's education and treatment. These facilities know exactly how to operate within those boundaries. Through Zoe, I learned what had happened in my absence. My parents had crafted an elaborate narrative about my special educational opportunity abroad. They displayed doctored photos in their home showing me in front of European landmarks images that had been created using old photos of me. They spoke about my tremendous progress and academic achievements at family gatherings. "Your mother would sometimes mention how difficult it was having you so far away, but that it was worth it for your future." Zoe said. Everyone believed them. The betrayal cut deep, but it also strengthened my resolve. I needed to confront them, not just for closure, but to reclaim the narrative of my own life. After a week of staying with Zoe, gathering my courage and making plans, I decided it was time. I didn't call ahead. I knew they would refuse to see me or prepare a performance for my arrival. Instead, I took a bus to my old neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon when I knew they would likely be home. Walking down the tree-lined street toward my childhood home felt surreal. Everything looked simultaneously familiar and foreign, like a dream version of a place I once knew. The house itself seemed smaller than in my memories, less imposing. Before approaching my parents' house, I made an unexpected detour. I spotted my brother Kyle washing his car in the driveway of a house just 3 blocks from our parents. Zoe had mentioned he had moved back to the area after college. He didn't notice me at first as I approached. When he finally looked up, the shock on his face was immediate. "Elise," he whispered, dropping the sponge he was holding. "Oh my God, Elise." He embraced me tightly, and I felt his body shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry," he kept repeating. "I should have done more. I should have stopped them." We sat on his front steps, and he poured out years of guilt and regret. He explained how he had tried to advocate for me in the beginning, but had been shut down by our parents. How he had been away at college when they made the decision to transfer me to long-term care. How he had tried to find me after graduating, but had been given contradictory information about my whereabouts. "They kept moving you," he said. "Every time I thought I had located the right facility, you'd been transferred. Eventually, I hired a private investigator, but even he hit walls. These places are designed to be difficult to find." He showed me letters he had written that I never received emails to administrators that went unanswered. "By the time I had the resources to really fight for you, you were already an adult on paper." They said you were staying voluntarily, that you had chosen to continue treatment. I told him about the coercion and manipulation that had led to that choice, about the years of being told I was broken and unfit for the outside world. I've spent the last 5 years building a legal case, he said, determination in his voice. I'm a lawyer now, and I've been gathering evidence about these facilities, about what happened to you and others. It's too late to change what happened, but we can fight to make sure it doesn't happen to more kids. Saying, with Kyle by my side, I felt stronger as we walked the final blocks to our parents' house. He squeezed my hand reassuringly as I pressed the doorbell, a sound that transported me back to childhood. My mother opened the door, her perfect smile freezing on her face as she registered who was standing on her porch. She looked older, her blonde hair now streaked with grey, but her posture was still rigid with the same controlled perfection I remembered. Elise, she gasped, her hand flying to her throat. What are you doing here? We weren't expecting. The program didn't call to. I'm not in the program anymore, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I haven't been for months. You should have called, so, she said automatically, shifting into her hostess mode, despite her obvious shock. We could have prepared for your visit. That's exactly why I didn't call, I replied. My father appeared behind her, his face hardening as he took in the situation. Kyle, what is the meaning of this? You should have consulted us before bringing your sister here. She doesn't need your permission to come home, Kyle said firmly. She never did. We moved into the living room, the same space where they had delivered the sentence that stole my adolescence and early adulthood. It looked different now, too redecorated, updated, but with the same underlying coldness. We did what was necessary, my father said defensively once we were seated. You were out of control, headed down a destructive path. I was 13, I said quietly. I listened to rock music and questioned your political views. That's not destruction, that's growing up. You don't understand the pressure we were under, my mother interjected. As a surgeon's family, we had a reputation to maintain. Your behaviour was reflecting poorly on all of us. The conversation continued in this vein with my parents, alternating between defending their decision and minimising its impact. They spoke about the excellent education they thought I was receiving, conveniently ignoring the reality of what these places actually provided. Did you ever actually check? I asked. Did you ever demand to see the facilities, to review the curriculum, to speak to me privately, without staff monitoring? Their silence was answer enough. You told everyone I was at a prestigious academy abroad, I continued. Did you ever wonder why this prestigious academy required such secrecy? Why you couldn't visit? Why my letters home were so generic and impersonal? We trusted the professionals, my father insisted. They assured us this was the best approach. They lied to you, Kyle interjected. And you chose to believe them because it was easier than doing the hard work of parenting a teenager. The confrontation lasted hours, cycling through accusations, justifications, and painful truths. What became increasingly clear was that my parents were incapable of acknowledging the full extent of what they had done. In their minds, they had made a difficult but necessary decision for my own good. The reality that this decision had caused profound trauma and stolen irreplaceable years was something they couldn't or wouldn't face. As the sun began to set outside, I realized there would be no Hollywood moment of reconciliation here, no tearful apologies or sudden understanding. My parents were the same people who had sent me away, still convinced of their own rightness. I didn't come here expecting you to understand what you did to me, I said finally, rising to my feet. I came to tell you that despite everything I survived, I'm building a life you tried to take from me, and I'm breaking the cycle of control and conditional love that defined this family. As Kyle and I walked out the door, my mother called after me. Will you be staying in town? Will we see you again? I turned back one last time. That depends entirely on whether you're willing to know the real me, not the daughter you tried to force me to be. We left them standing in the doorway, two aging people, unable to recognize the damage they had caused or the strength of the daughter who had survived it. Walking away from my parents' house that day was one of the hardest and most liberating moments of my life. There was grief for the relationship we might have had, anger for the years lost, but also a profound sense of freedom. I had faced my past and survived. I was no longer defined by their abandonment or controlled by their approval. Kyle offered me his guest room while I figured out my next steps. Stay as long as you need, but, he said, we have a lot of catching up to do. Over the following weeks, Kyle helped me navigate the practical aspects of establishing a life after institutionalization. He connected me with resources to obtain my GED, since my education in the facilities had left significant gaps in my knowledge. He introduced me to a therapist who specialized in institutional trauma, offering to cover the cost until I could afford it on my own. Zoe also became part of my support network, introducing me to her friends and including me in social activities. It was through her that I found a job at an art supply store in Minneapolis. The owner, a warm woman named Judith, took a chance on me despite my limited work history and unusual background. "I can tell you have an artist's eye," she said after I'd spent 20 minutes helping a customer find exactly the right shade of blue for their project. And everyone deserves a fresh start. Working at the store rekindled my passion for art in a way I hadn't expected. Surrounded by creative materials and people, I began to experiment with different mediums in my free time. Drawing, which had once been my secret rebellion, became my therapy and eventually my voice. 3 months after returning to Minnesota, I enrolled in my first formal art class at a community college. Sitting in a classroom as a legitimate student rather than an inmate disguised as one was both terrifying and thrilling. I struggled with the freedom to express my own opinions, to ask questions, to disagree with the instructor. Years of conditioning had taught me that compliance was safety, that having my own thoughts was dangerous. But slowly, with the support of my growing circle of friends and my continuing therapy, I began to reclaim my voice. I started small, offering opinions about art techniques or color choices, then gradually expressing thoughts about books, music, politics, all the topics that had been forbidden in the facilities. Through my therapist, I connected with an advocacy group for survivors of institutional abuse. Meeting others who had experienced similar trauma was profoundly validating. For the first time, I didn't have to explain or justify my reactions and struggles. These people understood the hypervigilance, the difficulty with choices, the complex grief for lost years. I began sharing my story at support group meetings, finding strength in the telling and in the nodding heads of those who recognized their own experiences in mine. One of the group leaders, Elise, suggested I consider becoming a formal advocate. "Your articulation of the experience is powerful," she said, "and sadly there are thousands of others still trapped in these systems." My relationship with Kyle deepened as we rebuilt our sibling bond. He shared his guilt about not doing more to help me, and I helped him understand that as a teenager himself, he hadn't had the power to stop our parents. "I'm using that guilt productively now," he told me one evening as we sat on his deck watching the sunset. "My law practice is focusing on family rights and educational neglect cases. What happened to you shouldn't be legal, and I'm working to change that." As for my parents, the relationship remained complicated. After our confrontation, they made several attempts to re-establish contact on their terms. They sent cards addressing me as their dear daughter, as if the past 12 years had been a minor misunderstanding. They invited me to family functions where they could present a united front to relatives and friends. I established firm boundaries, agreeing to occasional brief meetings, only in public places, never in their home. I made it clear that any relationship moving forward would be based on their acceptance of me as I actually was, not as they wished me to be. "I'm an artist," I told them during one tense coffee shop meeting. "That's not going to change. I have my own political views, my own spiritual beliefs, my own way of living. Either you accept that or we don't have a relationship." My father struggled the most with this new dynamic. He had always been the authority, the decision maker. Being asked to relate to me as an equal, to respect boundaries he had never acknowledged before, was foreign to him. My mother made more effort in her way. She attended one of my art shows, though her compliments were backhanded. "It's nice that you've found a hobby that makes you happy," she said, missing the point that art was my passion and emerging career. 6 months after returning to Minnesota, I made another big decision. I applied for admission to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. With my GED, portfolio of work, and an essay about how art had sustained me through difficult times, I was accepted with a partial scholarship. The day I received my acceptance letter, I sat in my small apartment, now decorated with my own artwork and treasured gifts from new friends, and cried with a mixture of joy and lingering grief. I was 22 years old and just beginning the education that most people my age had completed. I had missed proms, first dates, graduation, all the milestones that mark the transition from childhood to adulthood. But I had also gained something precious, the absolute certainty that I could survive anything. I had endured 12 years of attempted erasure and emerged with my core self intact. That knowledge gave me a strength that no one could take away. As my first semester of college approached, I made another decision. I created an online community for survivors of institutional abuse, a space where people could share their stories, resources, and support. I called it Reclaimed Voices, and used my art to create a logo of a bird breaking free from a cage. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from former troubled teens across the country, many still struggling to make sense of what had happened to them. Some were just emerging from programs others had been out for years, but still carried the scars. I connected them with legal resources, therapy options, and most importantly, with each other. Through this work, I began to transform my pain into purpose. The years that had been taken from me became the foundation for helping others reclaim their lives. The hyper-awareness that made everyday situations challenging became a strength in identifying systemic abuses that others might miss. In quiet moments, I sometimes still struggle with anger toward my parents. How could they have sent away their child? How could they have believed strangers over their own daughter? How could they have chosen their image over my well-being? But I've come to understand that they too were victims of a system that preys on parental fears and societal expectations. They were sold a solution to a problem that didn't exist by an industry that profits from family separation and the pathologizing of normal adolescent behavior. This understanding doesn't excuse their choices, but it helps me place them in a broader context. They were flawed people who made a catastrophic mistake, driven by their own insecurities and rigidity. Recognizing this has allowed me to find a measure of compassion without absolving them of responsibility. Today, at 34, my life bears little resemblance to the one my parents planned for me, or the limited existence the institutions tried to convince me was my only option. I teach art at a community centre, sell my work through local galleries, and continue my advocacy. I have built a chosen family of friends who love me for exactly who I am. My relationship with my birth family remains complex. Kyle is a constant supportive presence. My parents and I maintain a careful distance, connecting occasionally, but always with clear boundaries. I have forgiven them not for their sake, but for my own freedom from the weight of resentment. The journey of healing continues every day. There are still moments when institutional conditioning rises to the surface, when I hesitate before expressing an opinion, when I feel unwarranted guilt over minor choices, when I wake from nightmares of being locked away again. But these moments grow fewer with time and conscious work. What I want people to understand from my story is that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Whether you've lost years to institutional abuse, toxic relationships, or other circumstances beyond your control, your future still belongs to you. The path forward isn't about forgetting the past, but about refusing to let it define your future. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear about your own journey of reclaiming your life. Have you ever had to rebuild after a major setback, or find yourself after years of being told who you should be? Leave a comment below and share your experience. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message of hope and resilience, please like, subscribe, and share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be.